Final Fantasy VII Remake was my first Final Fantasy game. It was an odd entry point into the long-running franchise, given its mission was to recapture the nostalgia and magic of the 1997 entry, a game that released before I was even born. At times, Remake was awkward and unapologetic in its quirkiness and character, but in the end, I was overwhelmed by the boundless joy and sheer wonder that shined through every fiber of its sprawling ensemble. There was meticulous care put into each facial expression, each overture, and each emotional crescendo, an unyielding commitment to its own pure fantasy. It was a magic so successfully captured that I felt as though I was the nostalgic fan revisiting a beloved game from my own childhood. And after playing, I went to other Final Fantasy games looking for that same magic, that same sense of awe and wonder I felt in Remake. But after 4 years and 5 Final Fantasy games, nothing in the series quite matched what I got out of Remake. Thinking back on playing each of these games, I thought my lack of attachment to the other entries spoke to a larger issue about myself and massive video games such as Final Fantasy. When I was young, I could spend what felt like an infinite amount of time inside of fiction. And after hundreds of hours spent there, whether it was exploring the rings of Halo and battling within its exciting multiplayer arenas, or venturing into the vast open expanse and world of something like Fallout 4, I never had to justify my experience. I never had to ask, what am I truly getting out of this fantasy? And what am I leaving behind while doing so? If it's simply as a distraction, why spend hundreds of hours alone in a single-player story? Why not seek something out that's shorter and more communal? If it's for adventure, certainly sprawling epics with their thousands of pages worth of lore could afford that. But given the spontaneity and responsibility that comes with adult life, losing yourself in an RPG, an often isolated experience, can become uneven. With these notions looming in the back of my head nearly half a decade later, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Remake sequel, the second installment of the new Final Fantasy VII trilogy, was downloaded onto my PS5. As I booted up the game, I felt this almost existential pressure come over me. A pressure maybe not too dissimilar to the countless lifelong fans of the original Final Fantasy VII. Many of them now in their mid-30s, likely asking the same philosophical questions about playing games that I am sitting on my couch today, wondering if there are more fulfilling and interesting experiences outside my window, or even on my set-top box, than this 100-hour-long fantasy. Would Rebirth provide justification? Would it recapture the magic Remake sparked in me? Or would it provide yet another reason to leave the medium behind entirely? At the heart of Remake's story was the Shinra Electric Power Company, a corporatocracy that, through their exploitation of Mako, the planet's spiritually charged and life-sustaining resource, had overrun both the public and private sector to become this monolith of authority and power, preying off the world's need for their energy supply. Wherever you went in Remake, Shinra's cold metal reactors and their gargantuan industrial steel plates stared daggers into your periphery, reminding you of the company's unquenchable pursuits, of the necessity and impossibility of Avalanche's mission, and the central conflict the game was building towards. There was tremendous momentum from cutscene to cutscene, each character interaction, and every sequence, because it moved us closer and closer to that inevitable confrontation with Shinra. As our heroes depart Midgard at the start of Rebirth, leaving behind the steel skies of Shinra HQ for the open and varied landscapes that Rebirth will bring, the visual variety of these many lands accompany a complete derailment of narrative focus. Rebirth's story is sprawling, with tremendous amounts of optional and side content, but the train of momentum shares more in common with a drifting hot air balloon than a Japanese bullet train. Characters chase stray clues and red herrings from one locale to another, as if each area is a vacation from the last. Where Remake felt as though it was expertly teeing up special moments from the original, Rebirth appears to fall into these moments unintentionally. Like in the process of elongating FF7 into 3 games, the second installment story had become aimless, directionless, and overly padded. and this was immensely frustrating, especially early on. Maybe my mindset and this story weren't compatible after all, I thought. Maybe this game wasn't made for someone like me, someone doubting the impact of these endless fantasies. But as you move on and open up what occupies the space within and between the underlying plot points, the real thing driving the story and my emotions forward wasn't the random robed men or countless visions of Sephiroth I encountered. The reason I lumbered through the narrative fog was for the emotional connections each strange adventure brought. In short, it was for the characters. Tifa, the moral compass of the group, is optimistic, encouraging, and provides an even hand to the often one-sided perspectives the rest of the party offers. Her compassion and empathy, paired with her resiliency, create a fantastic foil to another standout, Barrett. Barrett, often feeling like the butt of many jokes in Remake, is given so much more depth here. He feels like the headstrong father of the group, yet he retains that over-the-top hilarity, coming from a fierce sense of hope rather than foolishness, which makes him so endearing and entertaining in his interactions. And then there's Aerith, a character so romantic, befitting of the fantasy Rebirth is crafting. From Remake and through Rebirth, hearts flutter at the chance of each midnight encounter with her, and the manner in which she and Cloud develop a connection just feels like sheer magic.
Pretty sappy, huh? Meant every word, though.
But Cloud, the main protagonist and intermediary to which all these characters interact, is the foundation to where we really become attached to Final Fantasy. His cold, unemotional exterior perfectly matched my own skepticism and high guard coming into Rebirth, wondering how a world this weird and unhinged could capture the cool collectedness adulthood was supposed to bring. Yet the warmth and vibrancy of the characters around him break down that armor in both the character and the player to reveal a suppressed playfulness and kindness resting below. Cloud, despite trying to act so uninterested and so cool, is actually really awkward and desperately seeking approval. Really, all he wants is to be meaningful to somebody else, yet he finds it difficult to convey given how jumbled his mind and past are. He's cocky, but almost in a childish way, asking for others to ignore how strong and how special he is, yet attempting to act apathetic towards their praise. In the 100-ish hours of Rebirth's content, the moments that revealed the cracks in Cloud's armor, few and far between as they may be, are the story's most powerful moments. A dynamic played so subtly and so perfectly that, like Cloud, you begin to latch on to the rest of the characters. You begin to let them into your hearts, and as that connection is formed, the story's levity and innocence begins to rise to the surface. And in a childlike haze, you start to embrace the game's fantasy, the endless sidetracking, and the insanity of the world. How insane is Rebirth? Well, it's as insane as Cloud teaming up with a dolphin to vanquish an evil sea monster, then riding the aforementioned Mr. Dolphin through beach balls and hula hoops to make him excited. It's as crazy as our main heroes, disguised as Shinra parade float leaders, stumbling into a chrome dome club built to celebrate the shimmering shine of shaven heads, recruiting military personnel. It's as crazy as Hulk Hogan with John O'Hurley's voice gifting a bright red 16-wheeler as recompense for his lack of faith in you, even interrupting your brawl with the main antagonist of the story to bring out a healing bench and vending machine to ensure a fair fight.
To ensure a fair and entertaining bout, we'll give you a chance to rest before the festivities.
No joke, that vending machine bit had me dying laughing when I saw it. Yet the nonsense and lunacy in all of these moments and so many more, after enough time, didn't wane my emotional connections. It didn't delegitimize the game's heart. Instead, it emboldens both, because Rebirth's world and its genuine characters make us believe in the most innocent and best versions of ourselves. Its eccentricities take your mind back, accepting and giggling at its insanity, yet those incredible characters, they capture your present heart, and that makes a tremendous impact. Looking back on Remake, its narrative wasn't its only design aspect that exuded such clear direction. Its gameplay cycle was simple and focused, not something too far out of the realm of any other third-person narratively driven Sony game, with their linear missions, their impeccably calibrated visuals, and story beats presented in mostly in-engine cutscenes. The combat system, on the other hand, was extraordinary. It was a perfect blend of action and strategy that looked just as incredible as it played. Remake's pure design, in conjunction with its thrilling combat, created a simple loop with the goal that the gameplay structure would provide a window to explore the legendary moments, wondrous iconography, gorgeous music, and unforgettable characters of the original game, just in a more familiar and active gameplay style. Rebirth has almost all the same game elements as its predecessor, but like its manic narrative and world, what's been added, the new gameplay elements, are overwhelmingly abundant, adding chaos to the entire experience. One second, you're fighting an enormous demonic entity. The next, you're playing in a card tournament where your final opponent is a dog dressed as a soldier. Next, you're in an emotional life and death standoff between Barrett and a long-lost friend, but that came just after you raced oversized chicken through a futuristic amusement park. For hours, you're in an open-world game with the typical genre staples. Another couple, a hyper-cinematic Sony game, and then a 2007 Wii Party game. Every element interspersed between each other at sporadic intervals. I'm surprised the credits omitted the list of drugs used by the developers, in all honesty. Acknowledging the volume and content on display, it's astonishing how well crafted so much of it is. You feel the care put into each minute-long segment and every tangential experience. The fact that the Queen's Blood card game is as good as it is speaks volumes to how much love and attention the creators poured into each one of these zany experiences. But with that being said, there are moments of wonky controls in a bunch of these minigames. There are entire new systems you have to master to complete singular side quests, and there are times where I felt the developers unnaturally dragging their feet in a particular mission or tangent to stretch runtime when the gameplay itself doesn't do nearly enough to justify it. Looking at any of these specific moments in a vacuum, devoid of the energy and elements that surround them, reveals the grimmest outlook on Rebirth's design. An unfocused and overstuffed experience with enormous peaks yet cavernous valleys. And in lockstep with the wayward-feeling storytelling, these qualms introduce the questions I asked at the top of the essay, pondering why exactly I'm spending so much time doing something so seemingly arbitrary and serendipitous. But each time I would run into this line of thinking, Rebirth somehow would change my mind. Take Costa del Sol, the seaside paradise you land on about 1/3 of the way through Rebirth's story. You could feel overwhelmed by the number of minigames or challenges the game forces you to play. Frankly, as I did. The pirate shooting gallery, the canine soccer minigame, nabbing enough Segway miles, it does feel a bit overindulgent, like a literal vacation from the main story, even accompanied by a separate, all-expense-paid cruise. But each time I felt this way, something would come up to ease that anxiety. Something would light up my heart and dull that nagging thought to justify the diversion. In Costa del Sol, that moment came during a tandem photography contest. My teammate, a disgruntled Shinra executive with whom I would have to capture hidden cactus stickers scattered across the tropical island. Yes, I promise, this is real. As you roam the resort, capturing critter stickers, you may grow frustrated by the quantity of stickers you have to photograph. You may become frustrated at the level of difficulty of I Spy Square is asking you to partake in. But as you take these pictures, your partner, the Shinra employee, begins to gush about the experience. He begins to express a fervent passion about the little cacti, and in the process, begins to recontextualize his career at Shinra.
Is someone shy? Hid yourself well, didn't you? At this point, I can't imagine life without you. We should spend every day together. Just imagine how splendid it would be.
And even if you don't see the joy in playing through an experience like this one, or the many, many others like it in Rebirth. What comes after, the reward for those diversions, almost always feels substantive, either with some affinity increase to one of your revered party members, or a unique ending that feels so in lockstep with the fantasy of the world that it just can't help but make you smile.
Well, if everyone's feeling it, how about we keep things going with another round? Eva, get me another Cosmo Canyon.
Make it 5.
But in all candor, what comes after is beside the point I'm trying to make. Trying to justify each of Rebirth's countless experiences or tangents as fun or essential, while laughing my head off at the weird Shinra employee, or while dragging a can away from a chicken to unknowingly lure it into an old lady's special chicken broth.
Allow me to whip you up some of Grandma Kazra's famous grilled chicken. Say goodnight, Pipperly.
It just all sounds ridiculous in the context of what this game is trying to bring out of us. Like the narrative, there's magic in the waywardness of Rebirth, the care that has gone into each one of the most random design elements. Despite the imperfections, it feels handcrafted. You hear the developers behind the visuals begging for you to give in to the silliness and splendor. There's so much imagination and innocence to be found in even the most mundane aspects of its gameplay that you trek through the nonsense, and in the process, discover a more curious, less serious, hidden self beneath the overthinking. Finding joy in Rebirth's waywardness and its weirdness are essential, but I don't want this to come across as embracing a sort of willful ignorance. Because there are cornerstones to this experience, besides the characters which we already talked about, so rock solid that they prove all the meandering comes from an abundance of love rather than just carelessness. With around 150 hours of playtime between Rebirth and Remake, the part turn-based, part real-time action system is absolutely incredible, remaining immensely satisfying, strategic, and suitable for the feelings and senses Rebirth aims to draw of the player. A great system continuing to be great might not seem so noteworthy, but I think the expert implementation of new elements and ideas from Remake to Rebirth showcases the developer's keen attention to detail and deserves merit. Take Breath of the Wild's combat to Tears of the Kingdom. Over the course of the former, you learn what works and what doesn't. The combat system was challenging, but you develop an immunity to its tricks, such that by the conclusion, it feels satisfying because you mastered its schemes and can successfully exploit its systems. Don't get me wrong, I love Tears of the Kingdom to pieces, yet when starting the sequel, there aren't enough new layers or complexities added on to make any essential recalibrations for the reimplementation of the same combat system, despite extra additive embellishments. Once you know how to abuse the perfect dodge, the swing cadence of each type of sword, and the various enemy designs, it all just becomes straightforward and pretty repetitive. This makes second-to-second combat feel as though you are completely in control from very early on in Tears, resulting in a less satisfying and inventive combat experience relative to its predecessor. Rebirth's additions to combat, on the other hand, feel multiplicative in nature, creating a considerable depth with just a few simple changes. First, a new synergy meter, with accompanying skills and chargeable abilities, unlocks powerful new moves with unique attributes. In practice, it's essentially just a second tier to the ATB system, adding another chargeable meter you need to be cognizant of during combat. Next, a small change with a substantial impact: perfect blocking, allowing you to nullify all incoming damage if you block precisely. This has tremendous yield in heightening the skill ceiling of Rebirth, so that with enough practice, an underleveled player can truly best any foe. Also noteworthy is the difficulty here. You don't die much in Rebirth, at least for main story content, but somehow you always feel like you're just about to. It's more challenging than Remake, but that comes as a function of what's been given to you in this sequel. No matter how much side content you complete, it always feels like you're the intended level for the story experience you're up against. But the most successful way this combat system remains fresh is its near perfect pacing for doling out additional accoutrements that help dress up and complicate the base level of combat. Whether that be a new base character added to your roster with their unique abilities or skill trees, or a new weapon ability that you can stack to one of the character's option select, the cadence at which these are added and the additional elements of combat they open up always feel exponential in nature. Like each character and skill joins with another you've already learned, meaning even 80 odd hours in, you're constantly juggling ever so slightly more ideas than you can keep track of. And I can't go without mentioning how all these elements are packaged together. From the heft of each strike to the buildup of the ATB meter, you sense the energy swelling up in anticipation of each attack, with a subsequent and satisfying release in their delivery. Visually, the filmic motion blur and the copious amounts of particle effects that accompany them make battles appear as striking and as engaging to watch as they are to play. Even the choreography of synergy moves, with their amusing delivery, or the epic limit breaks with their brutal and satisfying pauses on impact, emphasize a distinct weight and punch. You see the same love and care the writers have for the memory of these characters and the tale of this world in each and every battle, as if the battles themselves are integral bits of the lifeblood and vigor of the Final Fantasy experience. Really, every aspect of combat in Rebirth is stunning. And still, I haven't mentioned what allows Rebirth to scale from its mountainous highs to its absolute peaks: the music. Analyzing a great score is kind of like analyzing a summer sunset. Its merit feels self-evident, and its affectivity feels embedded in the personal circumstance surrounding how it was witnessed. Rebirth is no exception, and hopefully as this essay has gone on, that beauty and majesty has become apparent to the viewer. But there are still a few things I want you to consider. Like Rebirth's gameplay, the sheer volume of tracks and the scope of the genres they occupy are astounding. It's impossible to fathom the amount of effort and energy that went into crafting each unique theme, remix, and composition. Yet, scope feels like the weakest compliment I could pay to what this soundtrack has brought out of the game's material. If the combat system is the backbone, the characters, the nerves and tissue, and the weirdness, the subtle skin imperfections that make Rebirth feel human, then the music would be the fireworks that raise the hairs and ignite the senses. It takes great characters and makes them as iconic as fans have told us they were. It takes an incredible combat system and imbues it with a cataclysmic energy and punch. It's what can take a mundane narrative or gameplay moment and make it something memorably special. Rebirth's score is transformative. It's overflowing with wonder, hope, and joy. Like listening to the Star Wars opening crawl years past your first listening, Rebirth is epic, with just enough fairy tale magic that even the most hardened of hearts can't help but soften while taking it all in. Begrudgingly though, despite all my affection for Rebirth, the game's still struggling financially. It's pacing far behind other recent Final Fantasy entries in terms of units, well behind its predecessor, and Square Enix has publicly revealed their disappointment with the game's performance. Of course, there are many reasonable justifications for the low sales numbers. Its proximity to Final Fantasy XVI's release, its PS5 exclusivity, the lack of game engine innovations between Rebirth and Remake, a lackluster marketing campaign, and the fact that this is the middle installment of a 3-part series coming off a game that didn't exactly end very intuitively or smoothly. All of these are reasonable factors, but what brings me tremendous sadness is I don't think any of them are the driving force. My worry is games like Rebirth, indulgent in fantasies and the friction that brings, are going out of style. I fear people, including myself, are losing patience for friction. Friction like the meandering pacing, the indulgent tangents, and the weirdness of substance. We've removed so much friction in life, the bumps that make something harder to digest, that anything with friction risks alienating audiences. It risks making someone lose stimulation, their attention, and therefore switch to something more digestible and more comfortable. But sometimes friction is essential. Sometimes friction gives us the resistance necessary to find a new outlook to solve a problem. Sometimes it provides the human feel behind a project to allow us to fully connect to it. And sometimes it provides the guardrails necessary to get lost in a pure fantasy. Playing through Rebirth before understanding its magic, the analogy that often came to my mind was running through a fog, wandering aimlessly until something special comes up in view, which would then justify the indecisive roaming. However, in retrospect, I realized the fog wasn't the medium that blurred the lines of a great experience. It wasn't the sand between the diamonds that needed to be sifted through by the developers in order to create a more focused and more perfect game. The fog was the magic. The fog was the pixie dust. It blurred the lines and constraints of time management and the over-seriousness of adulthood to allow us to enjoy a true fantasy, something that makes us believe in a more innocent, more kind-hearted, but more importantly, more hopeful version of ourselves. Rebirth's friction, its inability to yield to easy digestion normalcy, is what allowed the game to be so magical to me. It's what allows the developers' care to shine through its fastenings. It's what allowed the characters to breathe and open up to one another. And it's what allowed so much creativity and strangeness to cascade onto each element of its design that you understand how much of a labor of love this game was to create. Some will look at the indulgent volume, the story that feels like it's holding together skyscrapers with cat yarn and pixie dust, or the slight awkwardness as detriments to the overall package. But in my eyes, the wonder, the joy, and the stratospheric highs are proof these quirks are just byproducts of making something this special and this magical. Rebirth helped me remember what pure fantasy can do for the spirit, that even adults need their own fairy tales every once in a while, so long as they can invite the strange feelings and oddities we may have lost, but deep down know, dream, and hope we have not forgotten.